No, not after everything I've been through. The cry tore from the dry throat of a 101-year-old YAKUT man, as frozen as the 79°C air that burned his lungs. He had just dragged 15 reindeer for miles across the relentless tundra, each step a battle against death itself, all for his orphaned granddaughter. But the sight that awaited him at the cabin was a living nightmare. Massive silhouettes of 7 brown bears, their enormous paws crushing the fragile dwelling, the wild stench of destruction mingling with the metallic scent of fear in the air. His old body trembled, exhaustion pulling him to the ground, but a primal roar of love erupted, and he knew the confrontation that followed would be more brutal than any hunt. And his granddaughter's fate hung by a glacial thread. The old man, whose name was Akeem, felt adrenaline burn in his parched veins, more potent than the biting cold. His eyes, once clouded by age and weariness, now gleamed with a wild intensity, reflecting the pale moonlight on the snow. He didn't think of the danger, the numerical disadvantage, or the overwhelming strength of the 7 brown bears that now turned to face him. His mind was fixed on a single point: his granddaughter, Anya, whom he imagined cowering in some corner of the cabin, terrified. With a hesitant step, which soon turned into an awkward run, he advanced, wielding the hunting axe that until then had served to butcher the reindeer. It was not a weapon against those beasts, but a symbol of his unwavering determination. The bears, accustomed to dominating the tundra, hesitated. The largest of them, an imposing male with ancient scars on its snout, let out a deep growl, a warning. But Akeem did not retreat. His thin lips stretched into a grimace of pure fury, and he repeated the guttural cry, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of the frozen earth. It was the sound of a love that defied death itself, the manifestation of a spirit that refused to be broken. The bears, perhaps confused by the audacity of that small, frail man, or perhaps sensing the invisible force of his will, began to stir. They expected no resistance, only the ease of a plunder. The lead male, with a flick of its head, seemed to give a signal. One by one, the furry giants began to move away, dragging themselves heavily into the darkness of the night, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a strong animal scent. Akeem watched them disappear, the axe still clutched in his trembling hands. The icy air seemed to suck the warmth from his body, and exhaustion hit him like an avalanche. But there was no time to falter. His granddaughter, with his heart pounding erratically in his chest, he rushed to the cabin. The interior was chaos: torn furs, broken wooden utensils, the iron pot overturned, spilling the little water that remained. The little food that had been stored was scattered and soiled. The table, made of rustic logs, was overturned, and Anya's small stool lay in pieces. A sharp pain pierced Akeem's chest as he saw the devastation of the home he had built with so much effort, but his fear for Anya was greater. "Anya, Anya, my little ice flower." The elder's voice was a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible over the wind whistling through the open cracks. He scoured the small space, his eyes searching for any sign of the girl. Every shadow, every silence, heightened his dread. He called again, his voice choked with emotion. Suddenly, a small movement. From behind a pile of reindeer furs that the bears had overturned, Akeem saw a pair of wide eyes shining in the dark. Anya. She was cowering, knees pressed against her chest, her face pale and smudged with soot but alive. A deep sigh of relief escaped Akeem's lips, and warm tears, long held back, streamed down his frozen wrinkles. He fell to his knees, extending his arms. Anya, with a small whimper, crawled to him, embracing him with surprising strength for her small body. The old YAKUT man held her close, feeling the warmth of her small body, the beat of her heart. She was unharmed, miraculously unharmed. The cabin might be in ruins, the food lost, but his granddaughter, the last thread of his hope, was safe. In that tight embrace, amidst the destruction and the relentless cold, Akim felt a flame of warmth rekindle in his chest. Resilience, the indomitable force of life, pulsed between them, a silent testament that as long as there was love, there would be a way. He kissed the top of Anya's head, his heart, once frozen by terror, now overflowing with deep gratitude and a renewed promise of protection. The warmth of Anya's embrace was a balm for Akim's wounded soul, but the biting cold of the devastated cabin soon brought him back to harsh reality. He pulled back slightly, holding his granddaughter by the shoulders, his eyes scanning her small, frightened face. "Are you all right, my ice flower? They didn't hurt you." His voice, still hoarse, carried a tenderness that contrasted with the surrounding landscape of destruction. Anya nodded slowly, her large eyes fixed on his, a solitary tear tracing a path down her dirty cheek. She couldn't speak. Terror still clutched her throat, but the grip of her small hands on her grandfather's worn clothes was eloquent. Akim pulled her into another tight embrace, kissing her tangled hair. That small body, so fragile and precious, was all he had. With Anya nestled in his arms, he rose with difficulty, his body protesting with every movement. The faint light of dawn began to peek through the cracks and holes in the wall, revealing the full extent of the damage. The reindeer furs, once carefully stacked for insulation, were torn and scattered, some stained with mud and snow. The few kitchen utensils, a heritage of generations, lay broken. The small table where they shared their meager meals was overturned, one of its legs broken. The floor, once clean, was now a mix of snow, dirt, and debris. Akim's heart tightened. Hunger was already a constant threat, and now, with the cabin in ruins and their few belongings destroyed, the situation seemed even bleaker. He felt a knot in his throat, a pang of despair he tried to suppress. He couldn't afford to falter. Anya depended on him. He needed to be the rock, the pillar of strength, even when he felt his own foundations crumbling. His eyes, however, did not linger on the destruction. They sought what could be saved. With Anya still clinging to him, Akim began to sift through the debris. He found a small wooden bowl, cracked but still usable. Nearby, under a pile of snow that had drifted in through the door, was the small ragdoll Anya loved so much, a gift from her mother. The old man picked it up, wiping away the snow and dirt with the sleeve of his tunic. "See, Anya," he said, his voice firmer now. "Your friend is safe." Anya took the doll, clutching it to her chest, a small smile flickering on her pale lips. It was a sign of hope, a small beacon in the darkness. Akim knew that rebuilding would be long and arduous. The 15 reindeer, his precious cargo, were safe outside, but bringing them in and processing them would be an immense challenge with the cabin in this state. He would need to fix the walls, seal the cracks, and find a way to light the fire again to melt snow and cook. The relentless cold of Yakutia waited for no one. But looking at Anya, at the small smile that now lit up her face, Akim felt a new wave of determination. He had faced bears, hunger, and solitude. He would rebuild, he would protect, for the love he felt for his granddaughter was stronger than any icy wind, more resilient than any wall of ice. He felt her snuggle closer, and he held her tight, silently promising that as long as he lived, she would never be alone. Akim let out a sigh that turned to vapor in the icy air. The silent promise to Anya echoed. But the devastated cabin was a burden. He needed to act, and fast. The low sun barely offered warmth, and the merciless steppe wind was already seeping in, turning the interior into an ice chamber. He gently moved Anya away, his eyes fixed on hers, conveying a calm he barely felt. "Stay here near these furs, my little one. Grandpa will try to fix things a bit." He pointed to a corner where the furs, though overturned, offered some insulation. Anya nodded, her doll clutched to her chest, watching him with seriousness. The old Yakut man began to move, every muscle protesting. His first task was to seal the larger openings. With gloved hands which barely felt the touch, he gathered the larger pieces of wood torn from the wall. They were heavy, but necessity fueled his strength. He fitted them as best he could, using stones and ice to secure them. It wasn't a lasting repair, but it blocked the biting wind. As he worked, his thoughts flew to the reindeer outside, 15 of them, a wealth, a blessing, but also a challenge. He needed to protect them from predators and the cold before the meat froze. Anya, seeing her grandfather's effort, began to imitate his movements. With her small hands, she gathered twigs and smaller pieces of fur, dragging them to the designated corner. Their eyes met occasionally, and a faint smile appeared on Akim's face, a silent acknowledgement of his granddaughter's help. That small flame of solidarity was a comfort. He knew the task would be long, but he was not alone. With each piece of wood fitted, a small victory was won against relentless nature. Akim, exhausted, paused, leaning against the makeshift wall. Icy sweat ran down him, but the wind inside the cabin was already less fierce. Now, the fire. Without it, there would be no melted water, no warm food, no heat. He rummaged through the debris in search of his flint and dry wood. Most of the firewood had been scattered and dampened by the snow. It was a blow, but not enough to break him. He found a small piece of birch bark, surprisingly dry, and his flint fallen under a pile of furs. A glimmer of hope. With Anya sitting nearby, watching his every move, Akim began to scrape the bark into fibers. His aged, aching fingers worked with precision. He gathered the fibers into a small pile, adding thin twigs that Anya had collected. The first strike of the flint produced weak sparks. He tried again, frustration growing but determination stronger. Finally, a bright spark fell onto the bark and smoke rose. Akim blew gently, carefully, and the smoke turned into a tiny flame. The warmth, however small, was a promise of life. Anya clapped silently, her eyes shining. The flickering flame illuminated the tired faces of Akim and Anya, a symbol of their resilience. The old Yakut man added more twigs, feeding the fire with the patience of one who knows life depends on it. The warmth began to spread, pushing back the cold and bringing a scent of smoke and hope. Akim knew the path would be long and full of challenges, but with the fire lit and Anya by his side, he felt the fight was not lost. He was a 101-year-old man, but his spirit was as indomitable as the steppe. He smiled at Anya, a genuine smile that warmed more than the fire. "We'll make it, my ice flower. We always do." The warmth of the small fire was an invitation to life in the devastated cabin. Akim watched Anya, who was now asleep, the rag doll nestled against her chest, her pale face illuminated by the flames. Tenderness and concern tightened the elder's chest. She was safe, but the night was young, and the Yakut winter was unforgiving. The reindeer, his precious game, lay outside, vulnerable to the cold and predators. With a groan, Akim stood up. Every bone ached, every muscle protested, but Anya's image was a powerful antidote to exhaustion. He needed to bring the reindeer to the safety of the cabin. Before dawn brought new dangers. The task seemed monumental, 15 frozen carcasses for a 101-year-old man. Hunger, however, was a more relentless enemy. He took his hunting knife and stepped out into the icy darkness. The wind whipped his face. The snow made every step a struggle. The reindeer were where he had left them, a mountain of frozen meat. Akim couldn't drag them all at once. He started with the nearest, cutting the ties. With Herculean effort, he moved one reindeer, dragging it inch by inch towards the cabin. His lungs burned, sweat streamed. He persisted. Anya woke to the noise and the cold seeping through the door. She saw her grandfather's bent silhouette, struggling against the weight of the reindeer. Without hesitation, the girl got up. picked up a piece of fur and dragged it to the door, trying to block the wind. Akeem, seeing her, felt a wave of emotion. His ice flower, frightened, was trying to help. "Don't worry, my little one," he gasped. "Grandpa's almost there." It took hours. One by one, Akeem dragged the reindeer into the cabin. He piled them in a corner, covering them with the least damaged furs to protect them from the cold. The interior was now cramped, but the smell of fresh meat was a promise of sustenance. He was exhausted, but the sight of the piled reindeer brought deep relief. Hunger would be kept at bay. With the reindeer safe, Akeem turned his attention to the fire. He needed more firewood. He rummaged through the debris, finding thicker pieces of wood. With Anya's help, who collected the smaller branches, he fed the flames, transforming the small campfire into a more robust fire. The warmth spread, and the smell of smoke and burning wood filled the air, a comforting aroma of home and safety. Akeem sat beside Anya, who had fallen back asleep, nestled with her doll and the warmth of the fire. He took a piece of reindeer meat, still frozen, and began to cut it into thin slices with his knife. The mere presence of food was a victory. He looked at his granddaughter, at the crackling fire, at the piled reindeer. The cabin was in ruins, but life persisted. That was the true spirit of Yakutia, resilience forged in ice and love. Akeem knew that rebuilding was beginning, but with Anya by his side, he felt an unshakable strength. Akeem felt the weight of the knife in his hand, the icy reindeer meat beneath his wrinkled fingers. Hunger, a spectre that had hovered over them for days, now receded, replaced by a promise of sustenance. He cut another thin, almost translucent slice and brought it to his mouth. The taste was wild, pure, the essence of life in those unforgiving lands. He watched Anya, still asleep, her chest rising and falling gently with her breath. Her image, safe and unharmed, was a balm for all his pains. But the cabin was an open wound in the heart of his world. The firelight danced on the holed walls, revealing the extent of the devastation. The insulation furs were torn. The logs forming the structure cracked in several places. The wind, though mitigated by the hasty patches, still whistled through invisible cracks, reminding him of the fragility of his refuge. Akeem knew he couldn't rest. Rebuilding was not just a task, it was a race against the death that the YAKUT winter imposed. He needed more than simple patches. He needed a lasting solution. With his mind sharpened by necessity, Akeem began to plan. The first priority was insulation. The torn furs could be sewn, but he would need more. He remembered a small cache of moss and dry clay he had saved for emergencies, hidden under a rock near the frozen river. It would be arduous to retrieve, but the moss, mixed with clay and a little melted snow, would form an insulating paste that would fill the cracks and harden with the cold, completely sealing the cabin. Anya stirred, a small whimper escaping her lips. Her eyes slowly opened, meeting Akeem's. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and saw the cut reindeer meat beside her grandfather. A small smile appeared. Akeem offered her a slice. "Eat, my little ice flower. We need strength for the coming day." Anya took the meat, chewing it slowly, her curious eyes watching her grandfather. "Grandpa, the house. It's broken," she whispered, her voice still hoarse from sleep and fear. Akeem nodded, his gaze serious. "Yes, my little one, but we will fix it together. Grandpa will go for the moss and clay, and you can help me gather the furs that are still usable." He explained in simple terms, using gestures so she would understand the importance of the task. The girl, with surprising determination for her age, nodded vigorously. She got up, the rag doll still in her arms, and began to collect the least damaged furs, folding them carefully. Akeem watched her, a warmth spreading in his chest. That small gesture of help was a reminder that he was not alone. The strength of family, the unbreakable connection between them, was the engine that fueled his will. He stood up, feeling the weight of age and exhaustion, but also a renewed energy. The sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in pale shades of pink and orange. It was a new day, and with it the promise of a new beginning. Akim knew that the journey to restore his cabin and his life would be long, but with Anya by his side, every step, however difficult, would be a step towards hope. He picked up his snow shovel and a bag of furs. The moss and clay awaited. The YAKUT winter was relentless, but Akim's spirit was even stronger. Akim tied the furs to his back, the snow shovel in one hand. The pale sun barely broke the horizon, casting long bluish shadows over the endless steppe. He kissed Anya's forehead, who was still chewing reindeer meat with sleepy eyes. "Grandpa will be back soon, my ice flower. Stay close to the fire." The girl nodded, worried, but her trust in Akim was palpable. He knew she would be safe, protected by the warmth of the fire and the reindeer. Stepping out of the cabin, the cold enveloped him like a cloak of needles. The air was so dense it seemed to shatter with each breath. Untouched snow stretched before him, a white, silent desert. Akim, despite his 101 years, moved with determination. Each step was an effort, but his mind was focused on the sealed cabin, a safe refuge for Anya. He walked towards the frozen river, where he would find the moss and clay. The path was treacherous, with deep snowdrifts and slippery ice. His eyes, accustomed to the white vastness, scanned the horizon. Hours passed, and the sun was already beginning its descent, tinging the sky with reddish hues. Akim felt his body heavy, his muscles numb, but the moss and clay were still far away. He needed to hurry, before total darkness brought the most intense cold and nocturnal dangers. It was then that he saw a dark spot in the white immensity, something that did not belong to the landscape. His already tired heart skipped a beat. Could it be an animal? The shape was strange, irregular. Cautiously, Akim changed his course, approaching slowly, his hunting axe clutched in his hand. As he drew closer, the spot took shape. It was not an animal, but an overturned wooden sled, half buried in the snow, and beside it, a human figure. Akim felt a shiver that did not come from the cold. A young woman, perhaps in her 30s, lay inert, covered by a thin veil of snow. Her clothes, though thick, were not enough for Yakutia's relentless temperature. Her dark hair spread across the snow, and one of her legs seemed to be at an unnatural angle. Akim knelt beside her. She was alive. He could feel a faint pulse, but hypothermia had already taken hold of her. A cruel dilemma presented itself. Anya, his granddaughter, waited for him in the cabin, depending on the moss and clay for survival, but that woman would die if Akim left her. Altruism, a value deeply rooted in his people, confronted the urgency of his own family. He looked at the woman's pale face, at the fragility of her existence, and a distant memory surfaced, the image of his own daughter, Anya's mother, lost to the cold years ago. He could not allow that to happen again. With a heavy sigh, Akim began to act. He untied the furs from his back, covering the woman. With effort, he tried to right the sled. It was heavy, but necessity gave him strength. He needed to take her back. The moss and clay would have to wait. Her life depended on his choice, and Akim knew with painful certainty that there was no other option. He was not just Anya's guardian, he was a guardian of life, a link in the chain of humanity. The darkness of night fell. The journey back would be arduous, but Akim felt new determination. He would do the impossible, as always. Akim felt the weight of the decision on his shoulders, heavier than any reindeer he had ever dragged. The darkness of night fell rapidly, engulfing the steppe in a cloak of ice and shadows. He bent over the woman, his gloved fingers fumbling with the overturned sled. It was made of heavy wood, likely laden with supplies that were now buried in the snow. With a groan of effort, Akim pushed. His muscles, already exhausted from the hunt and the bears, burned. Age weighed heavily, but the image of his daughter, Anya's mother, lost to the cold, was a whip to his soul. He could not fail again. With a guttural roar, more of fury against helplessness than of actual strength, Akim managed to move the sled. The wood groaned, the snow gave way, and slowly, painfully, the sled turned over. It revealed a small bag of furs and some simple tools, but nothing that could immediately help the woman. He carefully pulled her onto the sled, covering her with the furs he had untied from his back. The woman was lighter than he expected, but still a considerable burden for his dwindling strength. Her pulse was almost imperceptible. The journey back was a torment. Each step sank into the snow. Each gust of icy wind seemed to steal a piece of his soul. Akim pulled the sled with a rope tied to his chest, his body bent against the silent storm. His eyes, accustomed to the darkness, guided him through the monochromatic landscape, while his mind alternated between the dying woman and Anya, alone in the cabin. He imagined the small fire dwindling, fear growing in his granddaughter's heart. A pang of guilt struck him, but he pushed it away. Saving a life was an imperative that transcended everything. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Anya had woken again. The fire, once robust, was now just a handful of dying embers. The cold began to seep in again, and the darkness seemed denser. She clutched the ragdoll to her chest, her eyes wide, fixed on the door. Grandpa had promised to return soon, but soon in Yakutia could mean hours, days. A solitary tear ran down her cheek. She crawled to the fire, blowing on the embers with small breaths, trying to revive it. But her small lungs lacked the strength. Fear began to tighten its grip on her small heart. Outside, Akim felt the last remnant of light disappear. The temperature plummeted even further. He stumbled, almost falling, but recovered, determination etched on his rugged face. The cabin seemed a distant mirage. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the familiar silhouette emerged in the darkness. A deep relief, mixed with overwhelming exhaustion, washed over him. He dragged the sled to the door, which Anya had tried to seal with furs. Hearing the noise, Anya flinched, but seeing her grandfather's bent figure, she ran to him, hugging his legs. Akim held her briefly, his gaze fixed on the woman on the sled. "Help Grandpa, my ice flower," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need more fire." Anya, frightened by the stranger's presence, but trusting her grandfather, ran to fetch more twigs. Akim, with superhuman effort, managed to drag the woman into the cabin, placing her near the fire that Anya, with surprising effort, managed to revive. The flickering light of the flames illuminated the woman's pale face, revealing delicate features and a semblance of pain. Akim knelt beside her, untying her damp clothes and covering her with the dry furs Anya had collected. He examined her leg, swollen and at an unnatural angle. It would need care. The moss and clay, essential for sealing the cabin, would have to wait. The priority now was that woman's life. Akim felt the weight of responsibility, but also a strange peace. He had made the right choice. Anya, sitting nearby, watched the stranger with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The old YAKUT man took a piece of reindeer meat and placed it to warm by the fire. The cabin was in ruins, the winter was merciless, but the flame of life, hope, and human connection burned stronger than ever. Akim knew the path would be even more difficult, but the strength of compassion was his guide. Akim, breathing heavily, felt the warmth of the fire on his fingers as he turned the reindeer meat. The woman lay inert, her pale face contrasting with the dark furs that covered her, a specter of fragility amidst the brutality of winter. Anya, with an unusual seriousness for her age, stacked small twigs on the fire, watching the flames dance with silent concentration. Akim felt a mix of gratitude for his granddaughter's help and deep apprehension for the stranger's life. The girl was a beacon of help, but the situation was desperate, and time a relentless enemy. He leaned over the woman, his wrinkled eyes searching for any sign of improvement. Her pulse, though weak and irregular when he found her, now seemed a little more steady beneath his calloused fingers. Her skin, still cold to the touch, no longer had that waxy, lifeless hue of imminent death. Carefully, Akim touched the swollen leg. A low moan escaped the woman's lips, a hoarse sound that to Akim was the sweetest of melodies. She was feeling pain, which meant she was alive, that her body was reacting, fighting to return. "Anya, my flower," Akim whispered, his voice hoarse with weariness and emotion. "We need water, the cleanest snow outside near the door, carefully." Anja nodded promptly, her large dark eyes fixed on her grandfather, understanding the urgency. She took a wooden bowl that Akim had recovered from the debris and went out briefly, returning with the bowl full of pure white snow, her cheeks red from the cold. Akim placed it near the fire, watching it melt slowly, the steam rising like a small spirit. While the water warmed, Akim took a clean piece of cloth and dampened it. With slow, steady gestures, he began to clean the woman's face, removing the dirt and remnants of ice that clung to her skin. His fingers, though rough and aged by a century of labor and cold, were surprisingly gentle and precise. He noticed the delicacy of her features, the youth that the cold tried to steal. An old sadness tightened his chest, a vivid memory of his own daughter, Anya's mother, lost to the mercilessness of winter years ago. But this sadness transformed into an even greater determination, a silent promise that he would not allow history to repeat itself. He would save her. The snow melted, and Akim warmed the water until it was lukewarm. With a spoon, he tried to give a few drops to the woman, who swallowed with difficulty, a small but vital movement in her throat. Anya watched everything, her eyes wide, absorbing every detail of her grandfather's care. She approached, extending her small hand to touch the stranger's dark hair, a gesture of pure, childlike compassion. Akim smiled, a tired smile, but full of pride for his granddaughter's innate kindness. The cabin, though devastated and with the wind still whistling through its cracks, was now a sanctuary of hope and human warmth. The fire crackled, the piled reindeer promised sustenance, and life, fragile as it was being defended tooth and nail with every fiber of Akim's being. He knew that the moss and clay still waited, that the cold still threatened the cabin's structure, but at that moment, that woman's life was everything. He felt a deep connection with her, a stranger whom winter had thrown in his path, a test of his humanity. It was as if fate had tested his altruism, and he had responded with the strength of an unconditional love for life. The woman coughed weakly, her eyes opening for an instant only to close again, a fleeting glimpse of consciousness. It was a sign, a small but significant sign of life that rekindled the flame of hope in Akim's heart. He continued to warm her, to feed her small portions of water, to clean her face with a father's tenderness. Anya, now more at ease with the stranger's presence, sat beside her grandfather, watching her with less frightened curiosity. She began to arrange the furs around the woman, imitating Akim's gestures, a small angel of care. The old YAKUT man, though exhausted to the bone, felt a renewed energy, a strength that came from a deep place within him. The responsibility of caring for that life propelled him, pushing away pain and weariness. He looked at Anya, at the woman, at the crackling fire. The cabin was still broken, but human warmth and compassion filled every crack, every fissure. The night advanced, and Akim knew the fight was still far from over. But hope, like the small flame warming the cabin, burned strong and unshakable in his chest. He was not alone, and life, in its purest and most resilient form, was being celebrated there, in the heart of Yakutia. Against all odds, Akim did not sleep. The night stretched on, cold and silent, as he remained by the woman's side, a tireless guardian. His eyes, heavy with 100 years of life and recent exhaustion, watched every breath, every subtle tremor. Anya, exhausted by her own journey of fear and relief, had fallen into a deep sleep, nestled with her rag doll and the warmth of the fire, which Akim fed sparingly, conserving the little remaining firewood. The crackling of the flames was the only sound to break the heavy silence of the cabin, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo the woman's faint heartbeat. At dawn, a pale ray of sun peeked through the cabin's cracks, painting the snow-covered floor with a bluish glow. The woman stirred again, a stronger movement this time. Her eyes opened not just for an instant but fixed on Akim. There was confusion, pain, but also a glimmer of gratitude and recognition. She tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper escaped her cracked lips. Akim leaned in, offering her more warm water. She drank more easily, and a little color returned to her cheeks. Who are you?" she managed to murmur, her voice almost inaudible. Akim smiled, a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I am Akim, and this is my granddaughter, Anya. You are safe now, my daughter." He pointed to the sleeping girl. "Winter is cruel, but you are strong." The woman looked at Anya, then at the devastated cabin, and a tear ran down her temple. "My name is Lena," she whispered, her voice a little clearer. I was traveling to the neighboring village. My sled overturned. My leg." Akim nodded, understanding weighing on his chest. A dangerous journey, an accident, and Yakutia, merciless, had almost claimed her. He touched her leg delicately. "It's broken, Lena. We need a healer, but first you need warmth and food." Anya woke to the sound of voices. Her eyes widened when she saw Lena awake. With childlike curiosity overcoming apprehension, she approached, offering a piece of warmed reindeer meat. Lena accepted with a faint smile, a gesture that melted some of the ice in the girl's heart. The human connection, so fragile and precious, was beginning to form. Akim felt the intense cold still seeping through the walls. Lena's life was safer, but the cabin continued to crumble. The moss and clay were crucial. He could not delay any longer. With Lena injured and Anya so small, the task of sealing the cabin became even more urgent and complex. He needed help, but they were isolated. "Lena," Akim said, his voice soft but firm, "you are weak, but we need you. I need your strength to guide me. Where is your village? Perhaps someone will come looking for you." Lena closed her eyes, concentrating. "It's Kolima village, 3 days by sled to the north. I had supplies, but they are lost." Akim calculated. 3 days by sled meant at least 5 days on foot, perhaps more with an empty sled and deep snow. It was an immense distance for his 101 years. But the hope of help, of a healer for Lena, lit a new flame in his heart. He couldn't go alone, not with Anya and Lena to care for. He looked at Anya, who was now sitting beside Lena, showing her rag doll. The girl, with her innocence, had already formed a bond. Akim knew the decision was his. He couldn't leave Lena, nor could he risk Anya. The cabin needed to be sealed, and he needed help for Lena. An audacious plan began to form in his mind, a plan that would require all his wisdom and the resilience of his people. He would need Anya's strength, Lena's hope, and his own unwavering will to face the ice hell once more. Yakutia tested his faith, but Akim knew that life, when shared, was the greatest of victories. He stood up, the decision made. The moss and clay would have to wait a little longer. First, he needed to ensure Lena could survive the wait and that Anya was safe. He would need a signal, a way to attract the attention of whoever was looking for Lena, and he knew exactly what to do. Akim knew exactly what to do. His eyes, which had seen a century of relentless winters, gazed at the faint smoke rising from the makeshift chimney. It wasn't enough. He needed something that would scream for help across the white vastness, a message visible for miles, even to the trained eyes of hunters or travelers. He turned to Lena, who, though still weak, watched him with a mix of curiosity and a pang of guilt. Anya, sitting by the fire, played with her rag doll, but her ears were attentive. "Lena, my daughter," Akeem began, his voice soft but authoritative, "we need a signal, a big one, that burns for a long time. Do you remember your village's signal fires? How did they make them?" Lena coughed weakly, the pain in her leg radiating. "Yes, Akeem, we used reindeer fat and dry moss, but we needed a tall structure, so the smoke would rise above the trees and snow hills, and a lot of material to keep the fire burning." She looked at the devastated cabin, at the few furs and scarce firewood. "We don't have much." Akeem nodded. "We have the reindeer, they're fat, and the moss. I know where to find it, near the river. The problem is the structure." He looked at the cabin's ceiling, at the broken beams. A bold and dangerous idea began to form in his mind. "We can use the cabin walls themselves, what's left of them." Anja, hearing the word fire, dropped her doll. "Grandpa's going to make a big fire." Her eyes shone with the innocence of a child who sees magic in a challenge. "Yes, my ice flower, a fire that will call Lena's friends," Akeem replied, stroking her hair. He explained his plan: to dismantle the less essential parts of the cabin's outer walls, those already most compromised, to build a tall pyre. He would use the remaining furs and reindeer fat to create dense, dark smoke that would travel across the sky. Lena felt a shiver, not from cold, but from apprehension. But Akeem, the cabin, it will be even more exposed. "Yes," he agreed, his eyes fixed on his determination. "But your life, Lena, and our hope are worth more than wooden walls. If we are not found, the cold will take us anyway." The truth in his words was a blow. Lena swallowed hard, guilt tightening her chest. She was a burden. But the sight of Akeem's unwavering determination and Anya's faith lit a small flame of courage within her. "I can help," she said, her voice still weak but firm. "I can cut the reindeer fat. I have a small knife in my bag, if you can reach it." Akeem smiled, a smile that lit up his wrinkled face. "Your strength of spirit is already a great help, Lena. But yes, your knife will be useful." He retrieved the small leather bag that was on the sled. As Akeem prepared to leave, Anya clung to his leg. "Grandpa, can I help gather twigs, the small ones?" "Yes, my brave one," Akeem said, kissing her forehead, "but stay near the door and don't go far." The task was monumental. Akeem, with his aged hands and aching muscles, began to dismantle the cabin's outer walls. Each plank torn off was a groan of effort, each rusted nail a battle. Snow and wind entered through the new gaps, but Akeem ignored the cold, focused on his goal. He piled the wood into a makeshift pyre, using the remains of a fallen log as a base. Lena, knife in hand, began to slice the reindeer fat, a slow and painful task with her injured leg. But she persisted, her lips pressed in concentration. Anya, with her small arms, brought thin, dry branches, feeling like an essential part of the mission. The sun was already high when Akeem finished the structure. It was an impressive pyre for a man of his age, rising precariously above what remained of the cabin. He covered it with dry moss and the oldest furs, and Lena handed him the pieces of fat, which he strategically spread among the wood. The air was charged with anticipation. Akeem lit the fire with a carefully preserved ember. The smoke, at first thin and white, soon transformed into a thick, dark column, spiraling upwards against Yakutia's pale sky. It was a beacon of hope, a silent prayer sent to the heavens. He watched the smoke, his heart tight with uncertainty, but filled with unwavering determination. They had done what they could. Now all that remained was to wait, and to keep the fire burning, a task that would require constant vigilance and every ounce of his strength. The cabin was colder, more vulnerable, but the flame of hope burned stronger than ever, fueled by sacrifice and love. The smoke, a dark plume against the pale sky, was a spectacle of hope and despair. Akeem, his heart pounding in his chest, watched it rise, a silent prayer in every fiber of his being. The cabin, now an even more fragile skeleton, groaned under the weight of the intensifying wind. Anya, nestled close to her grandfather, looked at the smoke with wide eyes, not comprehending the magnitude of the sacrifice that kept her there. Lena, lying on the furs, felt every gust of wind that seeped through the new cracks, an icy reminder of their vulnerability. Guilt gnawed at her, but Akeem's determination was a beacon that prevented her from succumbing. Akeem felt the cold deepen, an icy embrace that seemed to suck the warmth from his bones. The flame of the signal fire outside was a constant consumption of their meager protection. He knew that every plank torn off, every fur used for the pyre was a calculated risk. But now, with the wind howling like a hungry wolf, the calculation seemed dangerously precarious. He looked at Anya, at her childlike face, and then at Lena, whose pale countenance revealed her internal struggle. The responsibility was an overwhelming weight, but also the source of his unwavering strength. Suddenly a crash. It wasn't the wind, but a sound of cracking wood, of yielding ice. Akeem raised his head, his eagle eyes sweeping the ceiling. One of the main beams, already compromised, could no longer bear the weight. With a prolonged, terrifying groan, a large section of the roof, heavy with accumulated snow and ice, gave way. Snow dust and wood splinters rained down on them. Yakutia's icy air invaded the cabin with brutal ferocity, almost completely extinguishing the internal fire and covering them with a layer of fine, biting snow. Anya let out a muffled cry, clinging to Akeem with all the strength of her small arms. Lena, despite the excruciating pain in her leg, tried to shrink back, terror etched on her face. Akeem acted purely on instinct. With a guttural roar, he threw himself over Anya, covering her with his aged body, protecting her from the falling snow and debris. His muscles protested, but he did not yield. He felt the impact of the snow and ice on his back, the cold penetrating his clothes, but his only concern was his granddaughter's safety. "Lena, over here!" Akeem shouted, his voice hoarse, pointing to the least affected corner, where a small portion of the roof still held. With superhuman effort, he pushed Anya aside and then, with his calloused hands, began to clear away the pieces of wood and snow that blocked the passage. The pain in his body was excruciating, but the image of Anya and Lena, vulnerable to the white hell, propelled him. He knew that time was an enemy, and every second of exposure meant freezing death. Lena, with clenched teeth and a face contorted in pain, dragged herself with difficulty, using her arms to move. Every movement was agony, but the urgency in Akeem's voice and the desperation of the situation forced her to find a strength she didn't know she possessed. Anya, still trembling, helped as she could, pushing small pieces of snow out of the way, her eyes fixed on her grandfather's fierce determination. Akeem finally cleared a small space. Pushing a heavy log aside, the wind and snow whipped through the opening in the roof, turning the cabin into an ice trap. The fire, now almost extinguished, was just a memory. They were exposed, more vulnerable than ever. But Akeem did not give up. He pulled Lena into the corner, covering her with the last remaining furs. He embraced Anya, feeling the small body tremble in his arms. The smoke from the signal fire outside continued to rise, a distant promise amidst the chaos. Akeem looked at the sky, at the smoke, and then at Anya and Lena. The cold was excruciating, the cabin a ruin, But the flame of hope in his heart, fueled by love and resilience, burned with an intensity that defied Yakutia itself. They had survived the collapse, but the night was still long, and the danger more real than ever. The battle for life had intensified, and Akeem knew that every fiber of his being would be tested again. He needed to keep everyone warm somehow until help or the end arrived. Akeem pulled Lena into the corner, covering her with the last furs. He embraced Anya, feeling her body tremble. The cold was excruciating, the cabin a ruin. The battle for life had intensified. He needed to warm them. With the interior icy, Akeem knew the external fire wouldn't be enough. Dying embers remained. Trembling hands gathered thin twigs, protecting them. Akeem blew a breath from his soul. A small flame rekindled, fragile but alive. Anya, watching her grandfather, extended her small hand to feel the warmth. Akeem pulled her close, using his body as a shield. Lena, lying down, watched, her eyes moist. Guilt tightened its grip on her, but the sight of that old man, fighting with ferocity, filled her with gratitude. "Akeem," she whispered, "your strength, unbelievable." Akeem merely smiled. As long as there is life, there is hope. He used pieces of wood to create a makeshift barrier around the flame. Akeem arranged the reindeer furs, creating a small cocoon for Lena and Anya. He sat in the opening, his aged body serving as a wall against the wind. The pain was constant, but he ignored it, focused on Anya's every breath, on Lena's every moan. The hours dragged on, a frozen eternity. Akeem fed the fire with the smallest pieces of wood. The smoke from the signal outside continued to rise, a distant promise. Doubt was a subtle poison, but Akeem pushed it away with determination. Suddenly a sound, distant, unmistakable, the barking of dogs. Akeem raised his head, his eagle eyes widening. Anya, who had dozed off, woke up, her eyes shining. Lena, despite the pain, tried to sit up, a faint smile appearing on her pale lips. They came, she whispered, her voice choked. The barking grew louder, closer, then voices. Akeem felt a wave of relief so powerful, his legs almost gave way. Warm tears streamed down his wrinkled face, tears of exhaustion, overcome fear, gratitude. He stood up, his joints creaking, and dragged himself to the cabin's opening. Two men, dressed in heavy furs, and a sled pulled by a dog team, emerged from the snow mist. Their faces were marked by cold and worry. One of them, robust with a thick beard, ran towards the cabin, his eyes fixed on the smoke. "Lena! Akeem! We are here!" he shouted, his voice filled with relief. It was Lena's father, an experienced hunter from Kolima village. Akeem nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight. The hunter approached, his eyes sweeping over the devastated cabin and the old YAKUT man. He saw Anya, small and frightened, and Lena, pale and injured, but alive. The relief on his face was palpable. Help had arrived. The ice hell had been challenged and, for now, conquered. Akeem felt Anya's hand squeeze his. He looked at his granddaughter, at Lena, at the newcomers. Life had prevailed. Human love and resilience proved stronger than any blizzard or cold. The conflict was resolved. It was time to rebuild, heal, celebrate. The conflict was resolved. It was time to rebuild, heal, celebrate. The hunter, whose name was Boris, quickly knelt beside Lena, his eyes moist with relief and concern. He touched his daughter's pale face with a tenderness that contrasted with his robust figure. "My daughter, thanks to the spirits, I knew you were alive." The other man, a village healer named Dmitri, was already examining Lena's leg with experienced hands, while Boris unfolded a warm, thick blanket, covering her carefully. Akeem watched the scene, his body trembling no longer from cold, but from a deep exhaustion he finally allowed himself to feel. Anya, still clinging to his leg, looked at the newcomers with a mix of shyness and curiosity. Boris turned to Akim, his eyes meeting those of the old YAKUT man. Without a word, the hunter bowed deeply, a gesture of respect and gratitude that came from the depths of his soul. Akim, you saved my daughter. My debt to you is eternal. Akim merely nodded, a tired but sincere smile appearing on his lips. Dmitri, with Boris's help, immobilized Lena's leg with makeshift splints made of branches and furs. The signal fire outside still burned, a testament to the sacrifice that had ensured their salvation. The men brought more firewood and furs, and soon the corner of the cabin, now more exposed, was transformed into a warmer refuge. Lena, though still in pain, felt the warmth and safety enveloping her, and a tear of gratitude ran down her temple. With Lena stabilized, it was time to leave. The cabin, now a ruin, would be left behind, a silent testament to the battle fought there. Akim picked Anya up, her small body nestled against his. Boris and Dmitri carefully moved Lena to the sled, where she was laid on a bed of soft furs. Before leaving, Boris approached Akim again. Akim, you and Anya will come with us. Our village is your home now. You are a hero, a father, a grandfather to all of us. The journey back to Kolyma village was long, but filled with new hope. Akim, sitting on the sled, with Anya asleep in his arms, felt the icy wind on his face, but his heart was warm. He looked at the vast white landscape, at the stars that shone with a cold, distant intensity, and knew he had fulfilled his purpose. He had protected Anya, and in the process had reached out to a stranger, weaving new bonds of family and community. Upon arriving at Kolyma village, they were received with warmth and admiration. The story of Akim, the 101-year-old elder who defied death and the ice hell for his granddaughter and a stranger, spread quickly. Lena recovered slowly, her leg healing, but her spirit strengthened by the experience. She became a second mother to Anya, teaching her the songs of her village and the stories of her people. Akim, in turn, was honored as a sage, a guardian of traditions, his presence a blessing to the community. He told his stories around the fire, his wrinkled eyes shining with the wisdom of a century. Anya grew up, strong and resilient, with her grandfather's courage and Lena's kindness. She never forgot Akim's sacrifice, nor the strength of the love that united them. The ruined cabin, far away, remained a silent reminder of the battle. But life in Kolyma flourished, a testament to human resilience, the strength of family, and the power of altruism. Akim lived many more years, seeing Anya become a young woman, and his legacy of love and overcoming became a legend in Yakutia's ice steppes. Life, in its purest and most unshakable form, always found a way, even against the 79-degree hell, when fueled by human connection and hope that never freezes. Days turned into weeks, and these into months, weaving a new tapestry of life in Kolyma village. The harsh winter gave way to spring, and the first signs of thaw brought the promise of renewal. Akim's cabin, now a home shared with Lena and Anya, was a refuge of warmth and laughter, very different from the ruin left on the steppes. Lena, with her leg healed, had regained strength and joy. Her eyes, once marked by pain and fear, now shone with a serene light. She dedicated herself to Anya, with a love that transcended blood ties, teaching her the art of embroidering furs, ancient songs, and stories of the forest spirits. Anya, in turn, flourished under Lena's care and Akim's wisdom. The girl, once small and frightened, now ran through the village paths, her laughter echoing among the wooden houses. She called Lena older sister and Akim hero grandpa, and the love among the three was an unbreakable bond, forged in adversity. Akim, though his 101 years weighed on his bones, found new purpose in each dawn. He was no longer just Anya's guardian, but a pillar of wisdom for the entire village. Young hunters came to him seeking advice on hunting routes, weather signs, and ancestral traditions. Women sought him out to hear his stories of relentless winters, epic hunts, and the indomitable resilience of the YAKUT people. His eyes, which had witnessed a century of change, now saw the future blossom in the faces of the village children. Boris, Lena's father, became a friend and son to Akim. He frequently visited the cabin, bringing fresh game and firewood. Sitting to listen to the old man's stories, his eyes full of respect, Boris's gratitude for Akim was deep and lasting. He made sure the elder and his girls never lacked for anything. Dmitri, the healer, also became a regular visitor, not just to check on Akim's health, but to absorb the old man's wisdom, learning about herbs and natural remedies. The story of Akim's hunt, the bear attack, the cabin's collapse, and the smoke signal that saved Lena became a living legend in Kolyma. Retold around the campfires, it was a constant reminder of the strength of the human spirit and unconditional love. The village children looked at Akim with admiration, and Anya, with pride, recounted her grandfather's feats, her eyes shining with the same determination. Akim, sitting in his fur chair by the fire, watched Lena and Anya play with the rag doll, the same one Anya had held in the darkest days. A gentle smile adorned his wrinkled lips. He had faced the 79dig's hell, hunger, bears, and the collapse of his home. But in every challenge, he had found a reason to continue, a flame to protect. And now, seeing life flourish around him, he knew every sacrifice had been worth it. Life in Kolyma was not without its challenges. Winters remained relentless and hunting a constant struggle. But the community, united by Akim's story and the spirit of altruism, faced each obstacle with renewed strength. Human connection, family, and hope were the pillars that sustained them, stronger than any blizzard. Akim lived many more years, seeing Anya grow and become a strong and compassionate woman, honoring her grandfather's legacy. He saw Lena find happiness and become a respected figure in the village, radiating a new light. And with each sunset over the icy steppes, Akim felt peace in his heart, knowing that love had found a way even in Yakutia, where life was a constant celebration of the human spirit's unshakable resilience.